There was only one decisive encounter in round 6 of the Shamkir Chess tournament. Let's take a look at it. Vladimir Kramnik had the white pieces against Fabiano Caruana. They reached this position after 19 moves. The opening was a torre attack played by Kramnik. Something of a misnomer because it's a very strategic opening. And Kramnik, out of the opening, has a strategic advantage. He's managed to secure control over the c5 square for his knights. And when the knight lands on c5, you can see that it looks at this weak pawn on a6. Black will have to assign one of his pieces to the defense of that pawn. Now, Caruana, of course, has a very nice outpost to the knight on c4, but crucially, it doesn't attack any weak pawn, that is. Therefore, Kramnik has a slight advantage. But that's not enough to win the game. He needs to somehow develop some play on the other side of the board, and this he started to do with g4. Looks like a very bold move, gaining space on the king side. I really like this, actually. And now there was a lot of shuffling where both players manoeuvred their pieces onto better squares. It's all very subtle stuff, this. So the rook coming over opposite the queen, e6. And now, first I thought perhaps h4 would be a good move, with the idea maybe h5, but knight e4 is annoying. And after the exchanges, then black plays f5, so solidly protecting the pawn on e4. Actually, I think it's very hard for white to make progress there. You can see that bishop will just land on this lovely blockading square on d5. A moment ago it wasn't the greatest piece, stuck on a8, but from d5 it starts to look very healthy indeed. So that's not the way to go. So because of that, Kramnik protected the e4 square. I think it's a good move. Queen e7. Okay, so Caruana also just improving his pieces and maybe thinking about e5 to break through to the e3 pawn. Here Kramnik played king h1, but I think that starts to drift a little bit. The move I like is queen f2. Now, first point is that this overprotects d4 so that white can get in e4. So, for example, let's see what would happen if, well, black goes along with this plan. I mean, this isn't best play for black, but I just want to show the idea. And now e4. And if white gets in e5, then we have a typical kingside pawn storm, and that should be very pleasant. But let's go back. What happens if black plays e5? Now, here's a lovely variation. White exchanges everything on e5 and then plays a really sneaky move, e4, which at first glance doesn't look like anything very special, but you can see after this that the line of the queen has been opened up to the rook on a7, and the rook and knight attack the knight on d6. Probably winning position for white. But okay, that's super sneaky. There you are, an extra point to the queen moving to f2. But I do like queen f2. It somehow feels right. Another point of queen f2 is that sometimes it can be nice to throw in bishop h4. But king h1, that starts to drift. And Caruana played an excellent move, bishop h6. So these two pieces are now attacking e3, and it's a little bit awkward for white to defend this. You could play f4, but after this I don't think white has any advantage at all. Rather similar to the variation we just looked at. Once black gets in f5, well, I'd say the position is equal basically. Position is 2 blocked. But Kramnik was somehow labouring under the illusion that he was still better here. And he played knight f4, wanting to keep the tension in the position. But this is a very awkward move, because now it's not simple for the knight to move because the e-pawn is still hanging. And Caruana played an excellent manoeuvre, and I think Kramnik had clearly underestimated this. The knight came back. I mean, it looks, for a moment, it looks really, really ugly. But in fact, after knight d8, this is very clever. The knight comes to c6. Now, earlier I talked about just this pawn on a6 being weak. But once the knight comes to c6, you can see that black actually has very nice pressure on the b4 pawn. Now, white could get round this by dropping back with the queen. And that covers b4. But black can actually open up the position. And, well, black has a little initiative here. I think white's still okay, but yeah, black's pieces are starting to work. But again, Kramnik somehow played very optimistically. He played e4, which is the move that certainly we'd like to play to try and close the position, gain more space on the king side. But after knight c6, this is very awkward, attacking two pawns. And, well, Kramnik clearly thought this was the moment to strike, but actually black is extremely well coordinated. I mean, this rook also looks very nice here. Seemed to be out of play earlier, but actually it can come into the game very nicely across the 7th rank. Knight takes b4. It's a good move. And here there was a very interesting moment in the post-mortem where Kramnik said that he considered d6, but was actually concerned about this queen sacrifice. Well, if this is a recapture, then black just takes on d6 and is a pawn up. But he said he was really worried about this and thought that in this position, even though black has just two minor pieces for the queen, he thought that black was probably winning because white has no counterplay here, zero counterplay. You know, probably this will drop, bishop blockades here, and then you start advancing the queenside pawns. Well, he might have a point. Caruana just said, well, queen f6 is really strong, and I think it is. The idea being roughly that black has excellent control over f4 and just picks this up. Much simpler way to play the position, actually. I mean, that's not the only variation. It's still a very complex position, but clearly that would have been good for black. Kramnik took on e6. Knight takes, and, well, because of threats, for example, here, that wins the exchange, or knight takes d3, that wins the exchange. So Kramnik played rook takes d3, f takes e6, but queen f6 might be even better there, but this gives black a big positional advantage. That bishop is suddenly an absolute monster in the corner of the board. This pawn is weak. Well, let's see what happened. Queen e1 defends the a pawn, but that attacks it again. And now rook f7, you can see this is absolutely horrible. And what a beast on c4. Kramnik's kingside, it might be packed with pieces, but actually with the advance of these pawns, you know, there's just a big hole behind those pawns. Here, there's pressure on e6. This is a great exchange sack. e5 can't be taken because of the pin. And now the pawn just advances, and you can see that the king is in terrible trouble. Both players a bit short of time now, but Caruana coped extremely well. There's a little trick here. That looks like an obvious move with some deadly threats, but out of the blue, after this check, the game turns around. That shuts out the bishop. White's going to take here, and black is probably worse there. But Caruana was alert, and instead he played bishop d5. What a fantastic blockader. And that just shuts out any counterplay from white. I mean, Kramnik struggled here to try to find something, but really it's a hopeless position for white now. His king side is just a wreck, and ultimately that's the direction black is turning. That pawn is really strong as well. Queen b4. Now, if bishop takes f3, of course this is the move that Kramnik would love to play, but just bishop e4, attacking the rook. When the rook retreats from the third rank, then black will be able to take here. Bishop g3, well, it's kind of a nothing move. I mean, black has everything here. h5. If the bishop retreats, then white will never get rid of this pawn, so that has to be taken. So now this bishop comes into play. Knight d2. The knight spins round, attacking these pieces. Knight takes g3, and if that's taken, then queen d6 and f2 is soon going to be decisive. You can see the king is so exposed. Kramnik played rook a6 with some sort of threats here, but bishop e4 covers everything, and also that's rather nasty. And now the decisive attack, queen e1. Check is nothing. And now it's forced mate. I mean, there are loads of other ways that white could choose to play, but there's absolutely no defence. If bishop g2, then that is checkmate, and this was the end of the game. King h3, and it's forced mate here. Kramnik resigned, because if king takes knight, then that is checkmate. Fantastic attack, counter-attack by Caruana. After the game, he said, "I thought my position was very unpleasant. If Vladimir was in the best form, I think he would have tortured me." Well, maybe, but it certainly wasn't easy to get a grip on this position and force a breakthrough on the king side. I mean, my suggested improvement was, black had other ways to play that. Maybe black could squash the position with f5, for example. Really not easy for white to break through there. But yeah, great game by Caruana. I have to say, it was slightly, apart from that game, which was very interesting, it was a slightly disappointing round. Geary had the white pieces against Carlsen, but played so conservatively and unambitiously, I would say. And Carlsen equalised the game and drew very easily. The other games were also drawn. So that leaves Carlsen in the lead with 4.5, Wesley So in second with 4, and Anand in third place with 3.5. Still 3 rounds to go.